Welcome back to another episode of the Integrated Podcast, a show where I chat with B2B SaaS leaders to learn about their journeys building successful products and how they've leveraged integrations along the way. I'm really excited to dive into today's episode because I'm joined by Krishan Patel, the VP of Product at Apollo.io. And he built Apollo's product-led growth strategy from the ground up. So I'm super excited for this chat. Welcome to the show, Krishan.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, super excited to be here. I think I was looking into Paragon as a solution a few months ago, and it's cool to finally end up having a relationship with you.
Yeah, it's been a while, but we finally made it work, and we're able to find some time to chat. So it's been great. I'm sure the audience would love to learn a bit more about you, both personally as well as professionally, in terms of how you went from sales to growth to now becoming the VP of product.
Yeah, definitely. It's quite a journey. So so I guess it was a pretty non-traditional route to becoming a VP of product. So coming out of college, I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do. Started my career in sales development at Oracle, and I was like, oh, it's a big company, it's a tech company, and because in sales I can help influence people's decisions at a pretty high level in their companies. And I thought that part sounded pretty interesting to me. But the part that wasn't interesting was, I guess, Oracle itself. There's a lot of bureaucracy there. I was a really hungry college grad coming out of UC Berkeley, and I wanted to grow in my career. And Oracle was a place where it's pretty slow moving, where I did extremely well in terms of hitting my quota. But if I wanted to be able to do things outside of my role to be able to influence a company, there was not really a place or time for that at Oracle. So, I think maybe a year in, a little bit less than a year, a sales recruiter reached out to me, and they sent me an email where it was like, hello, can you the Adele song, Hello? And they reference that. And I was like, oh, this is, I send cold emails. I like her approach, so I'll talk to her. So she sent me a list of 20 companies, and I did a bunch of research into each one. And Apollo, it was then called Zen Prospect, came to the top of my list because I was a sales rep, and I realized that if I had this thing for myself, not just myself, my entire team at Oracle would be able to set 5 times the amount of meetings they were currently setting. So I was like, this makes a ton of sense as a product. It's something I could sell in my sleep. So I moved to, it was then called Zen Prospect, and became a sales development rep there. And I guess just long story short, did really well in the SDR role, then became an AE 3 months later, became the top performer there as well for 2 years. And I guess I was able to sell it in my sleep. It actually ended up working out. But I guess I got kind of bored where, in sales, every single month, you're kind of doing the same thing to get to quota. You know what you need to do. And, it's just repeat and you get your commission check and it's great. But I guess I was looking for something that would kind of challenge my mind a little more and something that would help me grow as an individual a little bit more. So I was looking at other opportunities, and luckily my CEO, had a lot of trust and faith in me at that time because I proved myself, and he gave me the opportunity to become a growth product manager to explore, testing out a product-led strategy for Apollo. And I guess I did extremely well in that role, became head of growth 6 months later, did extremely well there, and then became VP of product. And I guess now I'm kind of just leading the product work over there.
And how do you find that learning curve, going between from sales into growth, which is a very different mindset? I'm sure you took a growth mindset to sales, which is why you did so well. But then taking all that insight and transitioning to product, which is, again, now you have to work much more cross-functionally. What was that learning curve like for you?
Yeah, definitely. So I think I've always been kind of data oriented, been a problem solver. So even though I approached in sales, I was much more technical sales rep, definitely had a very systemized process and how I went about in my quota and everything. But definitely was a whole new world going into product, going to growth. So honestly, I have this podcast playlist of 400 hours plus of podcasts. I guess this podcast will go on there. So I listened to a shit ton of podcasts. I also went through all the Reforge courses. Brian Balfour, he's the ex-VP of growth at HubSpot. He's created this amazing program called Reforge. Went through all of the product and growth-related courses there. Just went to a bunch of blogs, talked to a few advisors, joined little Slack communities, and just tried to read a bunch of books and just kind of try to absorb as much knowledge as I can about product, about growth. And anytime I did something new, I made an effort to learn about best practice. So if I'm going to redesign our onboarding experience, I'm going to spend an entire day learning everything I can about onboarding best practices and so on, and looking at competitors and looking at just best-in-class PLG companies, what they do to understand that before I even try to get started on a project. And I think just repeatedly doing that over time was able to lead to my success.
Yeah, because I feel like it's becoming more formalized now, but 5 years ago, product management there was no playbook. I feel like, people were just trying to figure it out as they went. And so being able to find those appropriate resources to help along the journey, I think is really useful. And that's why you're on this podcast today, because I think, you'll be able to share a lot on PLG with, our audience. But one thing, I guess, to take a step back, for those who don't know, can you kind of just share a bit about Apollo? We use them internally as well. So, big fan of the product, but how do you help sales teams like Stripe and Rippling drive revenue?
Yeah, no, love to hear that you're using the product yourself. So I guess to take a step back a little bit, when you think about traditional sales prospecting workflows, they're really manual and non-intelligent, and they require, taking a lot of time to work across multiple different, platforms with a slow and clunky process. And the end result is something pretty basic. Like you find some, person's contact information, you reach out to them, you try to get in touch. But if you want to get more advanced in that and want to get like deep research that's going to help you personalize the conversations, or want to get good insights and recommendations on like who are the specific people to reach out to, specific messaging and so on, that's really hard to do in today's market because all these tools are disjointed. They don't talk to each other. So, and then another thing is, a lot of the tools in the market today are geared towards the enterprise. So it's just a kind of a product capitalism, where like companies build products for those 1% of companies that have money to pay for things. And then they upcharge tremendously and so on. They have customer success teams that are responsible for onboarding these customers and so on. But we're trying to kind of flip the market a little bit and build something that's going to be useful to everyone, that's going to be turnkey, that immediately you can sign up on our website. You can start prospecting, building your outbound strategy, and iterating upon it. So that once you start with one sales rep, whatever you start doing, you start building your learnings within Apollo. And by the time you have 300 sales reps, our intelligence, our recommendations become so much more valuable for you because we have all that historical data on you to understand what has historically driven your success and what you might want to do in the future based off of that. So I guess long story short, we're a turnkey solution that provides the best of the elements of a lot of the existing software platforms. Like when it comes to sales prospecting, when it comes to sales engagement, when it comes to sales analytics, to try to help you based on what you've already done, find your right path to success when it comes to your go-to-market strategy.
That's great. And you touched on the fact that, most companies in the space are sales led, right? And Apollo originally was as well, but, you're ahead of the game in terms of starting the PLG process, or at least exploring that in, 2018, I think. So can you walk the audience through like, what was that thought process for the org, and what did you have to do to kind of prove it out to basically make it full shift from being a sales-led company to a product-led company? Because it's really top of mind for everyone now. I think every company wants to be product-led or have some component of product-led growth embedded in their product. I think, but your journey would be really insightful.
Yeah, definitely. I think it was one of the most challenging transitions that our org has been through, without a doubt. So I think back then, a lot of people always talk about product market fit. And I think Apollo had very strong product market fit in the SMB. So we had customers in the Fortune 500. We still do. We have more now, actually. But, and we had some success there. But where we found people really, really loved Apollo and really, really wanted to need Apollo was in the SMB, because those SMB companies wanted turnkey solutions that they can start to build their entire go-to-market process on. They don't want to try to learn a bunch of different tools. They don't want to they don't have people in-house that can like integrate all these things, and sales ops people or data science people that can extract the insights across multiple tools and to actually provide good recommendations. So they wanted this turnkey solution. And back then we were selling it with a sales-led model where a lot of people wanted month-to-month contracts. They wanted to be able to do pilots, try things out before committing to using us for an annual contract. But that was unheard of in our space. Like everyone sold annual contracts. So I think what we realized is that although we had product market fit in the SMB, we didn't have product market channel fit. The channel that SMB wants to buy through is product led. They want to be able to try something out, start building, ask questions later once they run into roadblocks. So once we acknowledge that like, hey, SMB is like where we're extremely strong, but we don't have the right channel fit there. Then we started experimenting with the channel. So we were extremely conservative in our approach. So we started off by creating this very bare bones version of our product, that you couldn't pay for at all. Is just for free users. That's extremely limited. And our goal at the start was to say, hey, like anyone that's unqualified from our sales pipeline that does not close from our traditional sales process, can we throw them into this product and will they actually use it and retain on it? And initially, like the usage and retention was terrible. So like, we were throwing people in this product, but like, some people would continue to use it and they really loved it, but most users just kind of like stopped using it within 2 months. So the first thing we started focusing on was like, okay, if we're going to throw people in this product, how do we make sure it's easy for people to adopt, to like get to the value quickly? And then two, once they get to value, how do we make sure that they build a habit around continuously getting value, from this product? Once we saw some good metrics improvements there, the next step was monetization. So we have this like free user base. How do we get them to pay for us? And that was really hacky back in the day. Like we threw up a landing page where if you click to upgrade, you get an email from me that tells you like how to put in your credit card information. Once you do that, like I'll go in and like manually process your card, and then all of a sudden you're like a paying customer. But in that like really hacky process, I think our first month we closed 120K in ARR. And we were like, wow, that's as much as a top performing sales rep. Like there's definitely something here. And I guess after that, it was just this we decided to go a little bit more towards all in. And there, I could speak to it more, but there's just this continuous cycle of identifying, okay, now what are our biggest gaps that will help us, increase growth in this thing? How do we tackle that? Once we see success there, what is the next biggest gap? Has it changed at all? And so on. So it's just this continuous kind of learning cycle and experimentation cycle of improving our weak parts and capturing any opportunities that we saw.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and with the PLG motion, because there's no sales, there's no official onboarding team there to support them. The experience has to be really seamless, and they have to be able to get to kind of the aha moment on their own, right? So, what were some of the levers that you pulled on and tried, at least, in that process of shortening the time to value, really like increasing adoption from day one, and ensuring that users who logged in and signed up were coming back after the first session?
Yeah, definitely. So I think that second part is like maybe even more important than the first part. The first part is like, how did it get to initial time to value? And there are a whole host of things that we did. So we changed our onboarding to help to make, we're an all-in product. So we wanted to first understand, what are people trying to do? And then once they tell us that, specifically build an experience that's going to help them get there as soon as possible and like guide them specifically to that experience. So I think that was really helpful in terms of getting them to the aha moment. Another thing was users coming through from different sources. So based on the source, if they have a landing page that talks about one thing or a landing page that talks about a specific contact and so on, we're able to take them directly into that part of the app that that mirrors the experience from the landing page to make sure that they have a pretty seamless experience from even before sign up to getting to the value that we're talking about. So I think those are a few things that we did to getting them to initial value. But getting them to, past that, to actually retain on the platform, we did some quantitative analysis to understand what are the actions that people take in their first month that leads to them still retaining 6 months later. And once we were able to figure out what those actions were, we built our onboarding experiences around getting them there. So we did a user is not successful if they just get value out of Apollo, once. The aha moment, no matter, didn't have any meaning to us anymore. We started focusing on the habit moment, which is a term that Reforge uses as well, which is, when do users get value enough from your platform that they start to build a habit around gaining value from your platform. So once we switched our metrics to focus on that instead, we saw, long-term retention go up tremendously because we said it's not enough for people to just get that one lead that they came for. How do we get people to start to prospect, wherever they are in their sales cycle? So we started focusing on extensions that take them outside of Apollo. And the integrations are also useful here, where it's hey, if people are then going to go into Outreach, SalesLoft, LinkedIn, HubSpot, Salesforce, how do we make sure that we start to plug into those platforms really well also? And yeah, I guess I could talk about retention all day. There's so many things we've done at this point. I guess I'll pause there.
Yeah, I was going to bring up integrations as part of that because, everyone has their existing workflows that they've built habits around, right? Their day-to-day, especially in sales where it's very repeatable, it's very, almost strict. There isn't a lot of variation from day to day. And so when they plug in a new tool or they try a new tool, that tool inherently sits completely outside of their existing workflows. So it's there's always going to be a level of friction. How important have integrations been in terms of helping accelerate that adoption? Because, once you are integrated, inherently you're a lot closer to their existing workflows. There's a lot less friction in terms of understanding how this fits in. Like there's no disruption really, right? So yeah, how early on was that a huge factor and a huge kind of necessary feature to build to even enable self-serve?
Yeah, so I think not at the very beginning stages, but it's like once we got our initial onboarding and everything to a decent state, where we were getting people activated to the aha moment, then like how do we get people retained? I think integrations came into play a lot larger there. And specifically, our like LinkedIn extension was one of the really big pieces where we were thinking about people come into Apollo maybe to find leads, and they want to find people that fit certain criteria, like people that are hiring for marketing teams and use Marketo or have a small marketing team right now, or have certain intent signals and so on. And then they can download a huge list of people. But once they download that huge list of people, they need to do something with it. And sometimes they'll use Apollo to like reach out to those people, but sometimes they'll use Outreach or SalesLoft. And even if they're not reaching out to those people and they use just like Gmail, sometimes they want to do more research on each person within LinkedIn before they reach out. So one thing that we really focused on was figuring out how do we get people from that first use case of like downloading a large list to transition onto these other use cases that live naturally within the rest of their workflow that are higher retention. So I think the LinkedIn extension became a really big piece, making sure that people had like tight CRM syncs and then also could get integrated with their engagement tools became a really big piece, because then Apollo went from being a solution that helps them with just one part of their sales process to being a part of their solution that lives in their sales process with them and helps them every step of the way.
Mm-hmm. And that ties into one of my questions I want to ask, which is like, internally, was there a struggle in terms of, pitching the integration with competitors? Because essentially, Outreach, SalesLoft are considered competitors to your campaign product, right? Which is, sending email sequences through Apollo. What was the logic behind that? How did you justify that move? And, it's something I believe in personally with a land and expand strategy, is you really own one part of the sales process and you slowly expand, because you don't want to prevent them from using your product if you don't integrate, for example, with their existing sales stack. But what was that discussion or decision-making process like internally?
Yeah, definitely. So I think like beyond land and expand, it is true that like we wanted to make sure that like we don't prevent users from using Apollo if they use these other tools, because we're an all-in solution. Not everyone's going to be able to use this for just for every single part of the experience. But I think beyond that, like what we thought about is, what does it take for our users to be successful? Like if we're trying to go sell to Oracle, which we have, and we've closed them, like if they're already using another engagement competitor, is it more? Are they going to be more successful if we try to tell them, take your hundreds of sales reps off of this other tool so that you can use Apollo's data plus this like engagement tool within Apollo? Or are they going to be more successful if we're able to inject into the experience that the reps are already doing and just provide the added value? And in my opinion, it's the latter, because change management is extremely hard as well. Like we don't want to, we essentially at the end of the day, we want to do right by our customers, and building the right experience did mean integrating with the tools that are our competitors in some sense. But it's not like we're integrating with the intent to rip them out down the road either. It's just we're integrating because we want users to love us. And in order for them to love us, we need to be able to plug into their existing flows.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And as you're building out more features, because you're an all-in-one product, whether it's integration, whether it's actual core product features, how do you start thinking about prioritization? This is something that comes up, even within the scope of integrations, but more broadly, because you're a VP. When you're looking at your overall roadmap, how are you prioritizing which features to build or integrations? Do you have a framework in place that you could share?
Yeah, definitely. So quantitative and qualitative data are both tremendous to this. So first of all, I think we look at the quantitative data first to understand like what are the biggest gaps or opportunities in our growth model, where like if we're able to move this metric, then that significantly changes our growth trajectory. And maybe that's user retention, maybe it's net revenue retention, maybe there's a bunch of different things that could, maybe it's ACV or upsell potential and so on. But like, first of all, what are those like biggest levers for us to pull? Once we know the biggest levers, then we want to understand there's both quantitative analysis you could do and qualitative analysis. So say that one of the levers is like user retention. Quantitative analysis would look like what are the users that are retaining doing that the other users are not. Then qualitative piece would be now how do we start to understand the how and the why. Certain users are doing these actions and certain users are not. Or I guess the why first, and then the how, like how do you get these users to do the same actions afterwards. Then I think there's also like the more macro level stuff. So trying to understand like if we're trying to win market share, like what is causing us to lose deals against competitors? What is causing customers to turn to competitors? Like what do users need, ask for help for whenever they're talking to support teams? Or what are the pain points that users still have, even if they're using Apollo and all of our competitors? And trying to understand our users extremely deeply, I think also plays a big part into once we understand what our users need, and once we understand where our biggest business gaps are, where's the overlap between that? And one thing that we do extraordinarily well is we have a user research team that's phenomenal. But on top of that, we almost use our go-to-market team as researchers. So support, marketing, less than marketing, but support, success, sales, like we have them systematically ask certain questions and input a bunch of data that product can collect to prioritize. If we're going to try to fix competitive churn or competitive loss reasons, what are the top things that we have scores based on number of customers churn, revenue churn, the size of those customers, and so on, that helps us really easily understand, what do we need to prioritize next once we're focused on this specific metric.
Mm-hmm. That's actually something I'm trying to roll out internally as well, because I think as a PM, you have so much going on. Even though you're probably hopping on user interviews, the scale of the sales team is still something that can be leveraged heavily, right? They have so many touch points with prospective customers. They're the ones losing deals. They're the ones getting feedback day to day, and being able to collect that and aggregate it, I think helps a lot with prioritizing the right features. And how do you go about then measuring the impact of those decisions, right? For example, like, did we make the right prioritization decision here? I imagine as you start launching multiple features at the same time, does it become really hard to even do cohort analysis to understand like what is the actual tangible impact of that specific feature?
Yeah, so we're pretty fortunate that at this point we've built up one extremely strong like quantitative data foundation so that we can track a lot of things in our product. But two is we have a very large user base. So if we want to actually run an A/B test, like we can get results pretty quickly when we have more than 35,000 users signing up every week. So I think it's relatively easy for us. We're like sometimes we'll split test something and we're looking for a specific metric that's going to impact, and we can literally see just what is the difference between these two cohorts. And usually we only need to split test it for like 2 to 4 weeks, and we're able to get enough data that's stat-sig that tells us like
Right.
what choice to make. But then I think there's the other things that are a little bit less tangible, where like maybe there's an enterprise feature that you built that isn't something that all of your users are going to use. So split testing is a lot harder to approach to validate that you're going in the right direction, because you're not going to get a large enough sample size if only like 0.1% of our user base is meant to use this in the first place. But the next thing we look at is did we eliminate the problem that created this? So for example, if sales reps are telling us that they're losing deals because of this specific reason, like we have a systematic process where they're filling out, every single time they lose a deal for this reason, it's like filled out in Salesforce. And same with go-to-market teams, where it's like every time they get a ticket that comes up because people are confused about this thing, then like that's logged. So does that number start to go to zero? Does this number no longer increase after we do what we think should fix that problem? Because at the end of the day, we're trying to reduce the need for human interaction. Like we want the sales rep to never have an objection. We want the support rep to never have like a question that is asked to them. We'll never get fully there, but if we're able to identify like what are the top themes that they're hearing, then how do we start to eliminate those? That's what we're really kind of measuring that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great approach. And there's also the challenge of like opportunistic features potentially, where, for example, you have a product vision, right? And there are certain features that you want to build because that's going to help shape the next iteration of the product as a whole. But then how do you balance that against this constant customer requests for the current version of your product? And as you start targeting different segments of the market, for example, if you're really owning the SMB space, potentially you are getting a lot of requests from the SMB segment, but you're also trying to build for, let's say, an enterprise segment. How do you balance the two?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. So I think for us, we have 8 different product teams here. So we've built them in a way where they're able to have key ownership over different. So there's 2 different types of product teams. One type of product team will like own a core product from end to end, but another type of product team might own a core metric from end to end. And that metric can be even like number of enterprise deals closed. It can be, they're the key owner of making sure that like, if we need to close more enterprise deals, how do they work with sales development to make sure we're getting enough opportunities here? How do they make sure they work with sales to understand like what are the reasons why we're losing these deals, and how do we build our playbook to overcome some of the gaps and so on? Then how do they work with their eng team to and with like prospects themselves to build the product that is like needed to be able to sell into the enterprise and so on. So I think it's by creating clear ownership of like, I'm not going to have one person own like trying to make sure that this product is successful for both enterprise customers and for SMB customers. Right. So I think having very clear lines of ownership is what we do right now, because the majority of our company is focused on SMB. So like we don't have to worry too much about that problem. But there is like a sliver of our company that is starting to think about how do we start to go up to the mid-market and enterprise. And we're able to staff PMs specifically on that are more cross-functional PMs that work with multiple departments, but also multiple areas of the product to make sure that we're building in those things that are going to satisfy those users. And they're much, much closer to those users as well. Whereas the rest of our PMs, they're hearing the more scaled feedback that we're getting from the 35,000 plus users that sign up every week.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess I'm asking all of this because I think, product management as a whole and prioritization, all those concepts apply, even if it's just the subset of like talking specifically about integrations, right? I think earlier stage companies often don't see integrations as product features. There's like a distinction in their mind of like, this is just an add-on. Whereas if you start thinking about them as product features, then they should be embedded in your overall prioritization process and, be treated as product features with clear KPIs. And so I guess transitioning from that, I'm sure you get a lot of integration requests because all sales platforms do. All sales SaaS always get a lot of integration requests from their customers or prospects. You built a Zapier connector early on, I believe. And, I actually think it's a great interim solution to kind of just address a lot of requests and enable users to continue having the workflows that they want, even if it's not the most seamless experience. But how are you approaching scaling your roadmap overall? And at what point do you decide that, hey, we should actually build this integration natively in our platform versus telling our users to go to Zapier, for example?
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah. So honestly, like Zapier is like a table stakes integration where something that a lot of people ask for, and it helps you like direct people towards something they can use to set up custom. So someone's asking like, hey, do you have an integration with this so-and-so CRM that like maybe very few people use? Like, yes, you can go use Zapier for that. But the problem is the user experience sucks. Like, I don't want to make my users sign up for some other second tool, figure out how to connect it to Apollo. And especially for less technical users like sales reps, like a lot of them get lost in the process. So it's not really approachable to them. So I'm always thinking about building direct integrations with any like actually valuable, a valuable company. So for example, like a Pipedrive or HubSpot or Salesforce and so on. Now I think the difficult part is when you have a bidirectional sync like Apollo does, that between contacts, leads, accounts, activities, your phone calls, your emails that you send, your opportunities, like all these different objects and custom fields, and they're pulling in both ways. It takes a lot of time to set that up from the ground up for every additional, CRM you link into or, other competitor or so on. So I think there's a middle ground, like with companies like Paragon, where, if you're able to build some type of scalable interface or scalable architecture that is going to help you connect with multiple different types of CRMs, but then you have a, intermediate tool like Paragon that helps you actually finalize the connection with all those different CRMs, I think that is definitely the way to go. And then how we actually prioritize which integrations to build becomes a little bit less around end effort at that point, because at least, instead of taking 6 months for every new integration, maybe it's going to take a month or 2 months. But what we then look at is the user base that is going to help. So is this going to help us get into a new market? Is this going to help our existing users retain significantly more? So we do have tracking of like if people try to connect their CRM, but they have a CRM that we don't currently support. They input like which CRM they'd like to see. So we're collecting thousands of data points every few months on which integrations people request, and then that's really like how we decide what is the next CRM that we want to start building. But again, like if that request is Or if one of the top 5 requests is something that's only valuable to customers that are in the deep enterprise, and that's not our focus right now, then we're not going to prioritize it. It's not going to help our existing users retain significantly more. And if deep enterprise is not our priority in terms of like where we're looking to go in the business, then it doesn't make sense to prioritize either. So I think it's just a combination of understanding what is going to help your users the most, where are you trying to go as a business, and then how easily can you set up the integrations. And luckily, like tools like Paragon help a lot with third party.
Mm-hmm. And so it sounds like the main bottleneck is still engineering for the most part. I mean, as always, right? I think for every feature, it's always where are you spending your resources, and how do you see that as like a competitive advantage, or like what is the competitive landscape like in terms of integrations for Apollo? Because sales engagement tools inherently benefit heavily, from integrations, in comparison to certain other verticals.
Yeah, so I think when looking at the market right now, I think there are other competitors that got the jump on us on like integrating with enterprise solutions. Then we got the jump on them with integrating with like SMB solutions. Like I think we had the most robust HubSpot solution. We were the first ones to integrate and so on. So we got a ton of traction there. But then we don't have a Dynamics integration. And when I think about like one of the things that's a little bit difficult is that we are an all-in-one company. So if you want to build an integration between Apollo and a CRM, that's way more difficult than building an integration with like just a data competitor and a CRM. Because all the data competitor needs to do is like push a lead from their solution to the CRM. But for us, like we're pushing and pulling to show you like who do you have, who do you not have, who have you engaged with, who have not engaged, and like things of that nature. So I think that that's something that's been a little bit difficult for us, is just trying to prioritize like which ones should we actually take on when it takes so much more effort for us to build an integration versus our competitors. And because we're a multi-product company, there's so many other things that we need to work on to improve our existing products that like integrations becomes really tough. So actually one thing I'm extremely excited for that I know you and I have talked about is the unified API that Paragon's building that will help us like truly build that scalable architecture where we build the architecture once for a CRM, but are able to connect it to like 8 different CRMs at once. That's something that I've been wanting from my current vendor that I haven't been able to get. So I think that's the type of thing, like just progression and technology of like the other tools that are surrounding to help developers and so on. I think those are the types of things that will help us fundamentally fix this. But before we get there, there isn't really a great solution to be able to say, hey, we're going to go integrate with 8 CRMs right now, because that would take away so much focus from our engineers for core parts of our business to helping our users today.
Yeah, you mentioned one thing in that where Apollo has much more sophisticated integration logic because it's bidirectional, right, by nature. And so each integration is a lot more complicated to build versus just a data provider. This is pushing data one way. But how are you thinking about integrations as like a product? So in the sense that, you can technically break down an integration in levels of sophistication, right? So you could technically launch a very MVP version of a workflow that just pushes data out for, your prospecting feature. Like, how are you thinking about approaching that? Like, do you think that it is necessary to launch an integration that's very robust at once? Or do you think there are opportunities where you build in like specific features within an integration and then over time you build upon that?
Yeah, definitely. So this is something that we have done is like, build integration. Like we're always going to break down our projects and build iteratively. So even with our HubSpot integration, for example, like our Salesforce integration is like another step above in terms of functionality that our HubSpot integration can do. And then all subsequent integrations will, definitely, we start with the bare bones. We usually do like to start with bidirectional sync only because if a user is using us for engagement, that is a must-have. And 50% plus of our paid users use us for engagement as well. So it's just in order to provide an experience where if we didn't have that, then the potential concern is they start adding a bunch of prospects from Apollo that are already people that they have in their CRM, and then we're sending them over without realizing that they're already engaging with them and so on. So I think in order to preserve our users' potential for success, we want to have some level of bidirectional sync to start. But we have been thinking about, like what is a way that we can like significantly gate this off, or like maybe if they're not using engagement at all, we can do a push only sync and so on. So it's definitely something we're thinking about, but it's a little bit complex just given the nature of like trying to do right by our customers and making sure that we don't set them up in a place where they're going to make mistakes and then they're not happy with all.
Yeah, because there's a lot of downstream impact of just sending your data everywhere, right? Like there's a lot of unexpected consequences that can come from that, especially depending on like their internal operations and how they've built, even like splitting their sales reps by territory, for example. I imagine.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
the last thing I kind of want.
Just one note
Sorry,
is like if you have a customer success manager talking to every single customer, becomes a little bit less of a problem. But I think because we're self-serve, like we need to be pretty intentional around the experiences we build to make sure that like we're not causing more confusion or potential room for error for our customers.
Yeah, that makes sense. And one last thing I kind of want to touch on was monetization. So you mentioned earlier on that was a big part of, validating the self-serve and PLG motion. How are you thinking about using integrations to force monetizing or force upsells, for example? So I know a lot of companies do, if you want the Salesforce integration, you need to be in a higher tier, right? Have you approached that? Have you been testing that as well? Like what's worked, what hasn't worked necessarily? Is there any insight that you're able to share?
Yeah, I could share a little bit about this. So I think all of our competitors are like, hey, if you want to push stuff to Salesforce, you need to be on our enterprise plan and so on. But I think we're the one company in our space that actually puts our users first. So we don't want to do that. We do want to capitalize on the fact that people that really need robust CRM integrations will pay more, but we don't want to limit our users and make it harder for them to be successful on all of our other plans. So the way that we go about this is we have 2 tiers of CRM integrations of like, if you need this extra advanced functionality that enterprise companies might need, then you can go onto our custom plans, our enterprise plans. But otherwise, we're going to try to give you, some type of integration for everyone. And then there's a second piece, which is like, hey, instead of charging you for the fact that you have an integration in the first place, we're going to have some type of credit model where it's like every time you push someone to your CRM or export them through CSV or push them into another integration and so on, like that is what you're charged on. So we're giving you unlimited data when you're using it within the app. But if you want to pull that data out of Apollo, then that's when you actually start to spend your credits and so on. So that's something that we're experimenting with. But I think the reason why is because we want users to be able to focus on like what do they need to do to be successful in the app, and then it's like as they're successful, as they start to increase usage and so on, that's what we'll charge on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think this insane focus on customer experience is why, at least for me on my LinkedIn feed now, everyone's raving about Apollo. And I think you shared something recently about like you did a survey, I think, against competitors, and overwhelmingly Apollo did a lot better from the user experience perspective. Yeah, so I guess looking forward, what are you most excited about for Apollo over the next 1 or 2 years, or even shorter term than that?
So I think kind of going back to what you just said is that we are 100% focused on the success of our users. So what that's going to look like in the next 1 to 2 years is like we're trying to build something where users of Apollo are like 10 times more successful than any other sales platform. And how we're going to go about that is with AI and machine learning at Apollo, because we have so much data from all of our free users and from users that use us for prospecting and engagement. We have historical data on them and stuff as well, that the more that you use Apollo, the more relevant recommendations that we can provide. So for example, we have data on your win rates, your average, your ACV, your average contact value, your sales cycle length, your open rates, your apply rates, your meeting rates, your positive call connect rates, and so on. And we have this huge database of contacts and accounts to enrich all this data with. Then we can start to figure out like, hey, what are the specific actions you should take with specific accounts and specific contacts within that account to generate X dollars in revenue? So that's what we're trying to get to is like provide. You can think about it sort of like Robinhood, where options trading 10 years ago was very difficult to get into. Now you go to Robinhood, you go to stock, and it's like, hey, these are 5 strategies you can take. Click a button, we're going to set up an iron condor for you, whatever the hell that means. But now, like that's what we kind of want to do in the Apollo. It's like, hey, we have these recommendations for you. Like, click this button, we estimate this amount of revenue. Or this amount of meetings, which will then turn into that amount of revenue and so on. So that's something I'm really excited for, is just seeing how we can actually make our users just tremendously, more successful than anyone that's using the competition.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Yeah, I think the ability to project almost like what are the inputs I need to put in now from a sales perspective to get to certain targets, right? Because that's always really hard for teams, especially earlier, SMBs, especially, I imagine they don't have kind of the sophistication behind their modeling to figure out like what do we need to do? And a lot of it's just like throw stuff at the wall and hopefully we build some pipeline this month.
Yeah, and especially when your targeting and your messaging and your analytics are all on the same platform, I think we're like uniquely positioned to be able to deliver on that vision of like helping you with both your targeting, messaging, like go-to-market strategy together rather than just kind of one piece of it.
Right. Awesome. Well, really appreciate the time you took today, Krishan. If people want to find you and follow your journey, building Apollo and kind of some of the insights that you're sharing on LinkedIn and elsewhere, where can they find you?
I think LinkedIn's probably the best place. My name's Krishan Patel, Krishan Patel. You can probably see it in the podcast description. I post on there from time to time. So if you give me a follow or connect, happy to always meet new people.
Perfect. I mean, that's how I found you, I guess. So
yeah, it is. I saw you around LinkedIn for a while. I saw you around my inbox for a while, and then I was like, hey, wait, actually, I should talk to this guy. So glad we were able to get connected.
Yeah, definitely. Appreciate the time and really enjoyed this chat. Thanks, Krishan.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks, Brian.